The rain hammered against the windshield of my pickup truck as I pulled into the driveway of the Silverstone Ranch. 3 days of driving from Phoenix, and I still couldn't believe what had brought me here. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The funeral program for Timothy James Morrison crumpled on the passenger seat beside me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My little brother was supposed to be alive. He was supposed to be starting his sophomore year at Arizona State University. He was supposed to call me every Sunday complaining about his professors and asking for money. Instead, I was sitting in the rain outside a cattle ranch in Montana, holding a phone that had just buzzed with a message that made my blood run cold. The text came from Timmy's number. 4 simple words that shattered everything I thought I knew. "Emma, I'm not dead." I stared at the screen until the words blurred together. This wasn't possible. I had identified his body at the county morgue just 5 days ago. I had watched them lower the casket into the ground at Sunset Memorial Cemetery. I had held our mother while she sobbed into my shoulder, both of us drowning in grief so deep it felt like we might never surface. But there it was, glowing on my phone screen in that familiar way Timmy always texted, no punctuation, straight to the point, like he was in a hurry to get back to whatever video game he was playing. My fingers trembled as I typed back, "Who is this? This isn't funny." The response came immediately. "It's me, Em. I know you're at the ranch. Don't trust Mom. Don't trust the sheriff." The accident wasn't an accident. The ranch house loomed ahead of me through the rain, its porch lights casting long shadows across the muddy yard. This was the address Timmy had texted me 3 weeks ago, along with a message that seemed innocent at the time. "Met someone. Might stay in Montana for a while. Address is 4847 Copper Creek Road if you need me." I had assumed he meant a girl. Timmy was always falling head over heels for someone new, usually lasting about a month before the novelty wore off. But now, sitting here with rain drumming against my truck, that innocent message felt like a lifeline thrown across an impossible distance. The front door of the ranch house opened, and a figure stepped onto the porch. Even through the rain and darkness, I could see he was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark cowboy hat that shadowed his face. He stood there for a moment, hands on his hips, watching my truck. Then he started walking toward me. I rolled down my window as he approached. Up close, I could see he was probably in his early 30s, with the kind of weathered face that came from years of outdoor work. His eyes were a startling blue-gray, like storm clouds, and when he looked at me, I felt something shift in my chest that had nothing to do with grief. "You must be Emma," he said, his voice carrying a slight drawl that definitely wasn't Montana-born. "I'm Jake Sullivan. Your brother told me you might show up." The way he said "told" instead of "had told" made my heart skip. "When did he tell you that?" Jake glanced toward the house, then back at me. "Why don't you come inside? We need to talk." I grabbed my overnight bag from the back seat and followed him to the porch. The ranch house was bigger than it looked from the road, with a wraparound porch and large windows that glowed warmly against the storm. Inside, it was exactly what I expected from a working ranch: leather furniture, exposed wooden beams, the lingering scent of coffee and wood smoke. "Sit," Jake said, gesturing to a couch near the fireplace. "You look like you haven't slept in days." He was right. Since the phone call from the Arizona State Police telling me about Timmy's accident, sleep had become impossible. I kept replaying the conversation with Officer Martinez. "Miss Morrison, I'm sorry to inform you that your brother Timothy was involved in a single vehicle accident on Highway 87. His truck went off the road and caught fire. I'm afraid he didn't survive." "Coffee?" Jake asked, already moving toward the kitchen. "I need answers more than coffee," I said, pulling out my phone. "Someone's been texting me from my brother's number. Someone who claims to be alive." Jake stopped in the doorway to the kitchen. When he turned around, his expression had changed completely. The polite concern was gone, replaced by something harder, more alert. "Show me," he said. I handed him the phone. He read the messages, his jaw tightening with each line. Finally, he looked up at me. "Emma, what exactly did the police tell you about the accident?" I recited the details that had been burned into my memory. Single vehicle accident, truck went off the road near Payson, Arizona, caught fire, body burned beyond recognition but identified through dental records. Case closed, accidental death, probably fell asleep at the wheel. Jake was quiet for a long time, staring into the fireplace. Then he said, "Your brother didn't fall asleep at the wheel. He was running." "Running from what? That's complicated." Jake sat down across from me, his hands clasped between his knees. "Timmy showed up here about 6 weeks ago. Said he was taking a break from school, needed somewhere quiet to think. I get a lot of kids like that, city kids who want to play cowboy for a summer before going back to their real lives. But Timmy was different. Timmy was scared." Jake's eyes met mine, really scared. Not homesick scared or overwhelmed by college scared. Someone wants to hurt me scared. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Timmy's number. "Em, are you with Jake? Good. He knows everything. Trust him. But don't let Mom know where you are." I showed Jake the message. He read it and nodded grimly. "Emma, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible. But your brother discovered something back in Arizona, something that people were willing to kill to keep quiet." "What kind of something?" Jake stood up and walked to a window, looking out into the storm. Timmy was studying environmental science. "Right? Working on some kind of research project?" "His senior thesis. He was investigating water contamination in rural communities." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain outside. He'd been working on it for months. Said it was going to expose some major corporations. It was more than that. Jake turned back to me. He found connections between the contamination and some very powerful people. People who thought a college kid's thesis wouldn't matter. Until Timmy started digging deeper. My phone buzzed again. They tried to make it look like an accident, but I got out. Had to leave everything behind, including my phone, using a burner now. "Stay with Jake. He's the only one we can trust." "This is insane," I whispered, but even as I said it, pieces were starting to fit together. Timmy's strange phone calls over the past few months. His reluctance to come home for spring break. The way he'd seemed nervous, distracted, like he was looking over his shoulder. "There's more," Jake said quietly. "The body they showed you at the morgue, it wasn't your brother. Timmy's alive, Emma, but he's hiding and he needs our help." I stared at him, my mind reeling. "How do you know all this?" "Because I've been helping him." Jake sat back down, his expression serious. "I'm not just a rancher, Emma. I used to work for the government. Homeland Security. I specialized in witness protection, keeping people safe when they'd stumbled onto things they weren't supposed to know." "Used to work?" "I got out when I realized we were sometimes protecting the wrong people. Came out here to Montana, bought this ranch, thought I was done with all that." He gestured toward my phone. "Then your brother showed up, and I couldn't walk away." Another message appeared. I know this is a lot, but they think I'm dead, which means they think the threat is over. That gives us an advantage. We can expose them, but I need you to be strong. Can you do that?" I looked up at Jake, the stranger, who somehow held the key to my brother's life. "Where is he?" "Safe, but not close. He's been moving around, staying off the grid. The people who want him dead have resources, money, connections, technology. They've been monitoring his known associates, including family, including me." Jake nodded. "Which is why he waited until now to contact you. He needed you to be somewhere safe, somewhere they wouldn't think to look. The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture that was both terrifying and strangely hopeful. The funeral ... was staged. The body in that casket was a John Doe from the Phoenix. Morgue, someone with no family to claim him. Timmy's research advisor, Professor Williams, helped arrange it. He's been working with us. My phone buzzed. Trust Jake M. He saved my life. And tell him I kept my promise about the backup files. Jake's expression changed when I read him the message. What backup files? I asked. Your brother's research. All of it. Names, documents, evidence of the contamination cover-up. He made copies of everything before he had to run. Jake stood up again, pacing now. That's why they tried to kill him. Not just to stop his research, but to get those files. And he still has them? Hidden, somewhere safe, but Emma ... Jake stopped pacing and looked directly at me. The people who want those files aren't going to give up. They think Timmy's dead, but they don't know about the copies. If they find out he's alive, if they discover where those files are hidden. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He didn't need to finish the sentence. I understood. My little brother was living on borrowed time, and the clock was ticking. Another message. I'm sorry I put you through this. I wanted to tell you, but it wasn't safe. They were watching. You, Mom, too. That's why I had to disappear completely. I typed back. Timmy, is it really you? Prove it. The response came quickly. Remember when you were 16 and caught me sneaking out to meet Jessica Martinez? You didn't tell Mom and Dad, but you made me promise to always tell you when I was in trouble. I'm telling you now, Em, I'm in trouble. My eyes filled with tears. It was him. It was really him. My little brother, who I thought I'd lost forever, was alive. What do we do now? I asked Jake. He was quiet for a moment, studying my face. That depends. How far are you willing to go to help your brother? Because once we start down this path, there's no going back. These people don't leave loose ends. I thought about the funeral, about watching them lower an empty casket while my brother was out there somewhere, alive and alone and scared. I thought about our mother, crying herself to sleep every night since the accident. I thought about the life Timmy should have had, the future that had been stolen from him. I'll do whatever it takes, I said. Jake nodded slowly. Then we start by getting you prepared for what's coming. Because Emma, this isn't just about saving your brother anymore. It's about exposing the truth. And some people will kill to keep that from happening. My phone buzzed one final time. Love you, sis. See you soon. As I read those words, sitting in this stranger's living room in the middle of a Montana storm, I felt something I hadn't felt since that devastating phone call 5 days ago. Hope. My brother was alive. And somehow this rancher with storm gray eyes was going to help me bring him home. But first, we had to survive whatever was coming next. I woke up to the smell of bacon and coffee drifting through the ranch house. For a split second, I forgot where I was, forgot why I was here. Then reality crashed back like a cold wave. My brother was alive. People wanted him dead. And I was in the middle of something that could get us all killed. Jake was standing at the stove. When I entered the kitchen, his back to me as he flipped eggs in a cast iron skillet. He'd traded his cowboy hat for a simple baseball cap, and I could see gray threading through his dark brown hair at the temples. There was something comforting about the domestic scene, even though everything else in my world had been turned upside down. Sleep at all? He asked without turning around. Maybe an hour. I poured myself coffee from the pot on the counter. My mind won't stop racing. That's normal. First 24 hours are always the hardest when your whole reality gets rewritten. He slid eggs and bacon onto 2 plates, adding toast from a stack beside the stove. Eat. You'll need your strength today. Why? What's happening today? Jake set the plates on the kitchen table and finally looked at me directly. In the morning light streaming through the windows, I could see the lines around his eyes, the kind that came from years of squinting into harsh sunlight and seeing things you'd rather forget. Today we go get your brother's research. I nearly choked on my coffee. You know where it is? I know where Timmy hid the backup drives before he had to run. But getting them won't be simple. Jake sat down across from me, his expression grim. The people who want those files aren't stupid. They may think Timmy's dead, but they're still watching key locations. What kind of locations? His apartment near a SU, his girlfriend's place. The environmental lab where he did his research. Your mother's house. Jake paused, letting that last one sink in. They're being careful, which is both good and bad for us. My stomach churned, and it wasn't from the eggs. My mother's in danger? Not immediate danger. They're watching, not acting, yet. But Emma, once we retrieve those files and Timmy surfaces, everything changes. They'll know he's alive, and they'll know someone's helping him. I set down my fork, appetite gone. Tell me about these people. Who exactly are we dealing with? Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of hard experience. Blackwater Environmental Services. On paper, they're a consulting firm that helps corporations manage environmental compliance. In reality, they're fixers. When a company has a contamination problem that could cost millions in cleanup and lawsuits, Blackwater makes it disappear. Not the contamination, that stays. Just the evidence and anyone who might talk about it. And Timmy found evidence of this. More than evidence, he found a smoking gun. Jake stood up and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner of the kitchen. He pulled out a manila folder and handed it to me. This is what your brother was working on when he stumbled into something bigger than a college thesis. I opened the folder and found myself looking at water quality reports, soil sample analyses, and medical records. The technical language was beyond me, but the patterns were clear enough. Elevated levels of industrial chemicals in groundwater near Phoenix. Unexplained clusters of cancer cases in rural communities. And at the center of it all, a company called Phoenix Industrial Manufacturing. PIAM, I said, reading the letterhead. On several documents. I've heard of them. They make computer components, right? Among other things. They also produce industrial solvents, pesticides, and a whole range of chemicals that are supposed to be disposed of safely. Jake pointed to a highlighted section in one of the reports. Except they weren't disposing of them safely. They were dumping everything into unlined pits on their property, letting it seep into the groundwater. I flipped through more pages, seeing the scope of the contamination spread across maps and charts. This is huge. How did they think they could cover it up? Money, lots of it, and connections in the right places. Jake returned to his seat. PIAM has contracts with the Defense Department, relationships with state environmental regulators, and a board of directors that reads like a who's who of Arizona politics. When Timmy started connecting the dots between the contamination and the health problems in surrounding communities, he wasn't just threatening one company. He was threatening an entire network of powerful people. My phone buzzed. Another message. From Timmy's burner number. Did Jake show you the Phoenix files? That's just the beginning. The real evidence is in the storage unit. I showed Jake the message. He nodded grimly. Storage unit? I asked. Public storage facility on Mill Avenue. In Tempe. Timmy rented it under a fake name, paid 6 months in advance. That's where he stashed the original documents, hard drives, audio recordings, photos, everything. What kind of audio recordings? Jake's expression darkened. Phone conversations. Timmy was smart enough to record some of his meetings with university officials, EPA representatives, even a few corporate executives who thought they were dealing with just another naive college student. Another message appeared. Jake has the key. Unit 247. But be careful. They might be watching storage facilities too. How would they know about the storage unit? I asked. They might not. But Blackwater is thorough. They've probably identified every property Timmy had any connection to and put surveillance on all of them. The storage facility is a risk, but it's a calculated one. I stared at the folder in my hands, trying to process the magnitude of what my brother had uncovered. Jake, if this evidence is so damaging, why haven't the authorities done anything? Surely someone in law enforcement isn't corrupt. Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. Emma, you're thinking like someone who still believes the system works the way it's supposed to. Timmy tried going through official channels first. He submitted his preliminary findings to the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. Know what happened? I shook my head. Nothing. His report disappeared into the bureaucracy. No investigation, no follow-up, no acknowledgement it was ever received. Then he tried the EPA, same result. Finally, he went to a local news reporter who specialized in environmental stories. And the reporter died in a car accident 3 days later. Single vehicle went off the road, just like Timmy's supposed accident. My blood ran cold. You think they killed a reporter? I think when you're talking about billions of dollars in potential liability and criminal prosecution, some people will do whatever it takes to protect themselves. Jake finished his coffee and stood up. Which is why we need to be very, very careful. My phone buzzed again. I know this is scary, but we have them. The evidence I collected will shut down PIM and expose everyone who helped cover this up, including the sheriff who declared my death an accident without a proper investigation. Sheriff? I looked up at Jake. Timmy mentioned not trusting the sheriff last night. Sheriff Bradley Morrison. No relation, despite the name. He's been in Maricopa County law enforcement for 20 years, and he's got connections to several companies that have environmental issues, including PIM. So he's corrupt? He's practical. Companies like PIM provide jobs, tax revenue, political contributions. Environmental activists cause problems. When Blackwater needed someone to make sure Timmy's death was ruled accidental with minimal investigation, Sheriff Morrison was happy to help. I felt sick. The very people who were supposed to protect my brother had helped fake his death. What about the medical examiner, the dental records that identified the body? Dr. Patricia Hendricks. She owes her position to political appointments. And she owes her political appointments to people who donate to the right campaigns. PIM and its associated companies donate heavily to those campaigns. Another message from Timmy. I have recordings of Sheriff Morrison talking to Blackwater representatives. Phone calls where they discuss handling the Morrison problem, he thought. They meant killing me. They almost did. Jake read the message over my shoulder. That's why Timmy had to disappear completely. They were closing in, and he realized the entire local system was compromised. Sheriff, medical examiner, even some university officials. University officials? Dean Sarah Palmer. She was pressuring Timmy to change his thesis topic, said it was too controversial for an undergraduate project. When he refused, she threatened to have him removed from the environmental science program. But he was a good student. He was graduating. Summa cum laude. Academic performance doesn't matter when you're threatening powerful interests. Dean Palmer sits on the board of 3 different companies that have environmental compliance issues. Having a student expose contamination problems reflects poorly on the university's relationship with corporate partners. I pushed my plate away, unable to eat another bite. The web of corruption was staggering. Jake, how do we fight something this big? These people have money, political connections, law enforcement on their side. What do we have? We have the truth. And we have something they don't know about. What? Jake smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. A direct line to someone they can't buy or intimidate. My phone buzzed. Tell her about Senator Martinez. Senator Martinez? I looked confused. The one from New Mexico? Senator Alana Martinez, chair of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. She's been investigating environmental crimes for years, and she's got a reputation for being completely incorruptible. More importantly, her nephew was one of the victims. Victims? Carlos Martinez, age 7. Died of leukemia 2 years ago. His family lived in one of the communities affected by PIMS contamination. Senator Martinez has been looking for evidence to tie the contamination to the cancer cluster ever since. Another message appeared. I sent her preliminary information through encrypted channels before I had to run. She's been waiting for the full evidence package. That's our way out, Em. We get the files to Senator Martinez, and she can protect us while launching a federal investigation. Jake nodded. But we have to get those files first. And that means going back to Arizona. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Back to where people think I'm grieving my dead brother, where they might be watching me. Yes, but Emma, there's something else you need to know. Jake's expression became even more serious. Timmy's not the only person who's in danger now. What do you mean? You came here. You're involved now. If Blackwater realizes you're helping us, if they figure out that Timmy's alive and you're the connection between him and the evidence. He didn't need to finish. I understood. My life was now in danger too. My phone buzzed one final time. Em, I'm sorry I dragged you into this. But I couldn't do it alone anymore. And I trust you more than anyone in the world. Are you ready to help me finish what I started? I looked at Jake, the stranger who had become my only ally in a world where nothing was what it seemed. Then I thought about my little brother, hiding somewhere, afraid and alone but still fighting for justice. When do we leave for Arizona? Jake checked his watch. We'll drive through the night. Less traffic, fewer people to notice us. But first, we need to prepare you for what we might find when we get there. What do you mean? Emma, your mother doesn't know Timmy's alive. She's been genuinely grieving, which makes her reactions authentic. But if we're going to keep you both safe, she needs to stay in the dark a little longer. The thought of my mother, still crying herself to sleep over a son who was actually alive, made my chest ache. That seems cruel. It's survival. The moment your mother knows the truth, her behavior changes. And if Blackwater is watching her, they'll notice those changes. Questions get asked. Investigations begin, and people die. I stared out the kitchen window at the Montana landscape, already missing the peace of this place even though I'd only been here one night. In a few hours, we'd be driving back into danger, back into a world where powerful people wanted my brother dead, and now might want me dead too. But for the first time since that horrible phone call telling me Timmy was gone, I felt purpose instead of just grief. My brother was alive, he needed help. And I was going to make sure he got it, no matter what it cost me. Let's go get those files, I said. The Arizona heat hit us like opening an oven door. After the cool mountain air of Montana, Phoenix felt like stepping into hell. Jake had driven straight through the night while I dozed fitfully in the passenger seat, waking every few hours to the sound of 18-wheelers thundering past on the interstate. We'd switched vehicles at a truck stop outside Flagstaff. Jake's ranch pickup for a nondescript gray sedan with tinted windows and Arizona plates. He'd made the swap with a man who asked no questions and accepted cash without counting it. Watching the transaction, I realized this wasn't Jake's first time operating outside normal channels. First rule of staying invisible, Jake had explained. As we transferred our bags, never use the same vehicle for more than 6 hours when you're in hostile territory. Now, sitting in a Denny's parking lot on the outskirts of Phoenix at 7 in the morning, I felt the full weight of being back in the city where everyone thought I was a grieving sister. My phone had been buzzing constantly with sympathy texts From friends and co-workers, each message a reminder of the elaborate lie that had consumed my life. "You okay?" Jake asked, studying my face across the table. "I keep thinking someone's going to recognize me. Ask me how I'm holding up. Offer there. Condolences about my dead brother who isn't actually dead. The key is acting naturally. You're allowed to be back in Phoenix. You have an apartment here, a job, responsibilities. Grieving people don't just disappear forever." My phone buzzed with a message from Timmy. I see you made it to Phoenix. Be extra careful today. I've been monitoring police scanners. There's been unusual chatter about surveillance operations in the Mill Avenue area." I showed Jake the message. His jaw tightened. That could be routine, or it could mean they're watching the storage facility specifically. He checked his watch. "We need to move fast. Get the files and get out before anyone notices patterns." "What kind of patterns?" "You showing up in Phoenix the same day someone accesses a storage unit rented by your supposedly dead brother under a fake name. Intelligence analysts look for coincidences like that." We paid our check and walked back to the sedan. Jake had parked it where he could see all approaches, facing toward the exit. Even his choice of restaurant booth had been strategic. Back. To the wall, clear view of both the entrance and the parking lot. "Where did you learn to do all this?" I asked as we pulled back onto the highway. 10 years with Homeland Security, mostly working undercover operations involving domestic terrorism and organized crime. You pick up habits. Jake glanced in the rearview mirror, checking for surveillance. The skills don't disappear just because. You retire to a ranch. Is that why you really retired? Just wanted a quiet life? Jake was quiet for several miles. When he finally answered, his voice carried old pain. I retired because I discovered that sometimes the people we're supposed to protect are the real criminals. And sometimes the people we're supposed to catch are just trying to expose the truth. Like Timmy. Like a lot of people. Whistleblowers, investigative journalists, activists. I spent years putting them in protective custody while they're enemies. Walked free with government contracts and political appointments. The storage facility appeared ahead of us, a sprawling complex of beige buildings surrounded by chain-link fencing. Jake drove past without slowing, making a complete circuit of the surrounding blocks. What are you looking for? Surveillance. Vehicles. Anyone sitting in parked cars who doesn't belong. Work vans or utility vehicles that could hide monitoring equipment. He completed the circuit and pulled into a gas station across the street. See that white panel van by the storage office? I squinted through the heat shimmer rising from the asphalt. Yeah, it's been there since we drove by the first time. Engines running, you can see exhaust fumes. But no one's gotten in or out. My stomach dropped. They're watching. Maybe. Or maybe it's just someone waiting for the office to open. Jake checked his phone. But we can't take chances. We need a distraction. What kind of distraction? Jake smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The kind that draws attention away from Unit 247. He pulled out a second phone I hadn't seen before and dialed a number from memory. Carlos? It's Jake. Sullivan, I need a favor. No, the kind where you don't ask questions, and I owe you a big one. Phoenix Public Storage on Mill Avenue. 20 minutes. After he hung up, I stared at him. Who's Carlos? Former D agent. He owes me for keeping him alive during a cartel investigation that went sideways. Now he runs a private security firm that specializes in surveillance detection. And he's going to help us? By creating a situation that requires the immediate attention of anyone watching this facility. 20 minutes later, a convoy of 3 black SUVs pulled into the storage facility parking lot. Men in suits and earpieces emerged, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that screamed federal law enforcement. They surrounded the office building and began what looked like a major investigation. The white panel van immediately came to life. I watched through binoculars as two men emerged, speaking rapidly into radio handsets, while trying to position themselves for a better view of the federal activity. "Now," Jake said. We drove into the facility through a side entrance, staying low. In our seats, the storage buildings were laid out in a grid, with Unit 247 located in the back corner farthest from the office. Jake parked behind a row of units that blocked us from view of the main activity. Unit 247 was a standard 10 by 10 space with a roll-up metal door. Jake produced a key from his wallet and opened the lock with practiced efficiency. The door rolled up with a loud metallic screech that made us both wince. Inside, the unit was packed with cardboard boxes, file cabinets, and computer equipment. Everything was labeled in Timmy's meticulous handwriting. Water samples 2023, PIAIM corporate documents, EPA correspondence, medical records, cancer cluster. "Jesus," I whispered. "How much evidence did he collect?" "Enough to put a dozen people in prison and cost PIM about $2 billion in cleanup and damages." Jake began loading boxes into a wheeled car he'd brought from the sedan. "Help me with these hard drives. They're the most important." I grabbed a box labeled Audio-Video Evidence and was surprised by its weight. Inside were dozens of USB drives, external hard drives, and what looked like professional recording equipment. Timmy recorded everything. Everything. Phone calls, meetings, even conversations with university officials who tried to shut down his research. Your brother was thorough. My phone buzzed. Get the blue external drive from the bottom of the electronics box. That's the master file with everything organized for Senator Martinez. I found the drive exactly where Timmy said it would be. It was small, about the size of a pack of gum, but it felt impossibly heavy in my hand knowing what it contained. "Got it," I texted back. "Good. That drive contains 847 documents, 23 hours of audio recordings, and 312 photographs. It's enough evidence to destroy everyone involved in the cover-up." Jake had loaded most of the boxes when shouting erupted from the direction of the office. Through the gap between storage buildings, I could see the federal agents apparently arresting someone while the surveillance team from the white van watched from a distance. "Carlos is putting on quite a show," Jake muttered. "But we need to move. This distraction won't last much longer." We finished loading the cart and wheeled it quickly to the sedan. Everything fit, barely, with boxes stacked to the ceiling in the back seat and trunk. As we prepared to leave, Jake's phone rang. "Carlos ... Yeah, we're clear." "What do you mean they're not buying it?" I watched Jake's expression change as he listened to the other end of the conversation. "Understood. We're gone." He hung up and started the engine immediately. "The surveillance team isn't falling for the distraction. They're sending someone to check the storage units." We drove out of the facility just as a man in a baseball cap and sunglasses was walking toward the back rows of units with a clipboard. That fooled no one. In the rearview mirror, I saw him break into a run when he spotted Unit 247 standing open. "Where are we going now?" I asked as Jake navigated through Phoenix traffic with the controlled urgency of someone who needed to disappear quickly without attracting attention. "Safe house. Somewhere we can examine the evidence properly and figure out our next move." "Safe house?" "Apartment I keep for situations like this. Paid for in cash, utilities under a fake name, stocked with everything we need to disappear if necessary." The safe house turned out to be a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a complex that had seen better days. The kind of place where neighbors minded their own business and management didn't ask too many questions as long as the rent was paid on time. Inside, the apartment was Spartan but functional. Basic furniture, no personal items, multiple deadbolts on the door, and windows that had been covered with blackout curtains. Jake immediately began setting up the computer equipment we'd taken from the storage unit. "Emma, start going through the paper documents." Look for anything that directly implicates government officials or law enforcement. I opened the first box and was immediately overwhelmed by the scope of Timmy's investigation. Water quality reports showing contamination levels 50 times above safe limits. Medical records documenting cancer rates in affected communities that were statistically impossible without an environmental cause. Corporate memos discussing containment strategies and liability minimization. But it was the photographs that made my hands shake. Images of industrial waste being dumped directly into groundwater sources. Pictures of children playing in contaminated areas while warning signs lay face down in the dirt. Photos of PIM executive shaking hands with state environmental officials at fundraising dinners. "Jake, look at this." I handed him a photograph showing Sheriff Morrison accepting an envelope from a man identified in Timmy's notes as David Blackwater, CEO, Blackwater Environmental Services. That was taken at a political fundraiser last year. Timmy was working as a catering server to get access. Jake studied the photo. If that envelope contains what I think it does, we have direct evidence of bribery. My phone buzzed. Did you find the Morrison photos? There are more in the evidence box. Photos of him meeting with PIM executives, Blackwater representatives, even the medical examiner who signed my death certificate. I found the additional photos. The meetings were clearly clandestine. Parking garages, empty restaurants, county office buildings after hours. In every image, money or documents were changing hands. "This is a conspiracy," I said, stating the obvious but needing to say it out loud. "It's more than that. It's a criminal enterprise operating under the cover of legitimate government and business." Jake had connected one of the hard drives and was scrolling through audio files. "Listen to this." He played a recording that was clearly a phone conversation. The voices were distorted but identifiable through Timmy's careful labeling. "Sheriff Morrison, we have a problem. The Morrison kid is getting too close to information that could hurt all of us." "What kind of information?" "Water contamination. Data, medical records, correspondence between PIM and state regulators. If this gets out, it won't get out. I'll handle it." "How?" "The same way we handled the reporter. Accidents happen." My blood turned to ice. They were talking about killing my brother. And they'd done it before. Jake stopped the recording. "There are hours more like this. Phone calls, in-person meetings Timmy recorded with hidden devices, conversations between conspirators who thought they were safe. How did he get access to all this?" "Your brother was brilliant, Emma. He didn't just stumble onto the contamination. He built a methodical case, identifying key players and finding ways to get close to them. He worked part-time jobs that gave him access, catering company that served political events, cleaning service that worked in corporate offices, research assistant positions at the university that put him in contact with industry consultants." My phone buzzed again. "Tell Jake to play the audio file labeled Palmer Blackwater March 15. That's the recording that proves the university conspiracy." Jake found the file and played it. Dean Palmer's voice was unmistakable. "Dr. Hendricks has agreed to cooperate with the death certificate. Sheriff Morrison will ensure minimal investigation. But we need guarantees about the university's liability exposure. The university will be protected. Our clients value institutional partnerships. As long as the Morrison research disappears completely, there will be no connection between the contamination and the university's environmental science program." "And the professor who was supervising his thesis?" "Dr. Williams is being relocated to a position at another university. His cooperation has been ensured." I felt sick. Even Timmy's thesis advisor had been compromised or removed. "Emma," Jake said quietly, "do you understand what we're dealing with now? This isn't just corporate corruption. This is a systematic conspiracy involving law enforcement, government officials, university administrators, and medical professionals. They faked your brother's death to cover up environmental crimes that have killed dozens of people and will kill dozens more. I stared at the boxes of evidence surrounding us, each one representing lives destroyed by greed and the abuse of power. My little brother had uncovered all of this, and they'd tried to kill him for it. What do we do with all this evidence? We get it from Senator Martinez. But first, we need to make sure Timmy is safe. Because once we go public with this information, everyone involved is going to be looking for him. My phone buzzed. It's time for the final phase. But I need to see you first. There's something I have to tell you in person. Something about why they really wanted me dead. What does he mean? I asked Jake. Jake's expression was grim. I think your brother discovered something even worse than environmental contamination and corporate corruption. What could be worse than that? I don't know. But if Timmy's been holding back information even from us, it means he's been protecting us from something he considers more dangerous than everything we've already seen. I looked around the safe house at the evidence of a conspiracy that had already cost lives and destroyed families. If there was something worse than this, something Timmy had been afraid to share even with his sister and his protector, then we were about to enter territory none of us were prepared for. But my brother needed me. And after everything I'd learned, everything I'd seen, I wasn't going to abandon him now. Tell him we're ready, I said. Whatever it is, we're ready. The abandoned mining facility sat like a skeleton against the Arizona desert sky, its rusted equipment and crumbling buildings testimony to dreams that had died decades ago. Jake had driven us 2 hours northeast of Phoenix, following GPS coordinates. Timmy had sent to an encrypted messaging app I didn't even know existed. He chose this place for a reason, Jake said as we parked behind a collapsed ore processing building. No cell towers within 10 miles, no satellite coverage, no way for anyone to track us electronically. I checked my phone and saw he was right. No signal bars at all. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt truly cut off from the world. It was both terrifying and oddly peaceful. How will we know when he gets here? We won't, that's the point. Jake checked his sidearm, a gesture that had become as routine as breathing. In situations like this, the person who's been hiding controls the meeting. Timmy will find us when he's ready. We sat in the car for 20 minutes, watching heat waves shimmer across the desert floor. The silence was broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Then, without warning, my brother stepped out from behind a boulder formation 50 yards away. Even at that distance, I could see how much he'd changed. Timmy had always been lean, but now he looked gaunt, hollow-cheeked, like someone who'd been living on adrenaline and fear for too long. His hair was longer and darker, obviously dyed, and he moved with a wariness that broke my heart. But when our eyes met across that desert wasteland, his face broke into the same crooked grin I'd known since we were children. He jogged toward the car, and I was out of my seat before Jake could stop me. Timmy caught me in a hug that lifted me off my feet, just like he used to do when we were kids and he wanted to annoy me. Except now I never wanted him to put me down. "You're alive," I whispered into his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with desert dust and fierce sweat. "You're really alive." "Yes, sis. I'm alive." He held me for a long moment, then pulled back to look at my face. "But I'm so sorry I put you through this. The funeral, the grief, thinking I was gone. I'm sorry for all of it." Jake approached cautiously, hand near his weapon but not threatening. "Timmy, you look like hell. Feel like it too." Timmy released me but kept one arm around my shoulders, as if he was afraid I might disappear. "Thanks for keeping her safe, Jake. I knew I could count on you. We got the evidence from the storage unit. All of it. But you said there was something else, something you needed to tell us in person." Timmy's expression darkened. He glanced around the desert, checking sightlines and escape routes with the paranoia of someone who'd learned to expect danger from every direction. Let's get inside the old office building. Less exposure. The mining company office was a 2-story concrete structure that had somehow survived decades of abandonment better than the rest of the facility. Inside, it was hot and dusty but provided cover from any potential surveillance. Timmy led us to what had once been a conference room, its windows boarded up and its walls covered with graffiti from urban explorers and desert rats. "Sit down," Timmy said, his voice carrying a weight I'd never heard before. "Because what I'm about to tell you is going to change everything you think you know about this situation." Jake and I took seats in folding chairs that creaked ominously under our weight. Timmy remained standing, pacing like a caged animal. "You know about PIAM, about the contamination, about Blackwater Environmental Services covering it up. You know about the corrupt officials, the fake death certificate, the network of people who wanted me dead to protect their secrets." "Yes," I said. "We heard the recordings. We saw the evidence. That's all true, but it's not the whole truth." Timmy stopped pacing and looked directly at me. The contamination at PIM wasn't an accident. It wasn't even criminal negligence. It was deliberate." Jake leaned forward. "What do you mean, deliberate?" "I mean PIM was dumping industrial waste into the groundwater on purpose, as part of a controlled experiment to study the long-term effects of chemical exposure on isolated populations." The words hit me like a physical blow. That's impossible. No one would deliberately poison entire communities just to study the effects, wouldn't they? Timmy pulled out a tablet from his backpack and showed us a document I'd never seen before. "This is a contract between PIM and something called the National Defense Research Institute. It authorizes a longitudinal health impact study of industrial chemical exposure in controlled demographic environments." I read the document twice before the implications sank in. They were using people as test subjects, not just people. Specific populations. The communities around PIM were chosen because they had particular demographic characteristics, age distributions, income levels, ethnic backgrounds. They wanted to study how different groups responded to contamination over time. Jake's face had gone pale. "Jesus Christ. That's not an environmental crime. That's crimes against humanity." "It gets worse." Timmy swiped to another document. The study wasn't just about physical health effects. They were also monitoring psychological impacts, social disruption, community breakdown. They had researchers embedded in local hospitals, schools, social services agencies, even churches. Researchers, sociologists, psychologists, epidemiologists, people who presented themselves as graduate students or nonprofit workers or government health inspectors. They were all collecting data on how the contamination affected social structures, family relationships, community cohesion. I felt sick. How long has this been going on? 15 years. Maybe longer. The contract I found only covers the most recent phase of the study. Timmy sat down heavily in a chair across from us. Some of the people who got sick, who died, they weren't just victims of corporate greed. They were test subjects in a human experimentation program. The room fell silent except for the sound of wind whistling through gaps in the boarded windows. I tried to process what my brother was telling me, but my mind kept rejecting it as too monstrous to be real. "Who's behind this?" Jake asked finally. "Who authorized human experimentation on American citizens?" That's where it gets complicated. Timmy pulled up more documents on his tablet. The National Defense Research Institute is a Pentagon contractor, but the funding comes from multiple sources. Defense Department, Department of Health and Human Services, even the CDC. This isn't rogue scientists or one corrupt agency. This is an interagency program with oversight from the highest levels of government. And you have proof of all this? I have contracts, funding authorizations, progress reports, personnel assignments. I have recordings of conversations between study coordinators, discussing subject mortality rates and acceptable loss parameters. I have photographs of researchers celebrating successful data collection at conferences where they presented findings from the PIAIM study. Jake stood up and began pacing, a mirror of Timmy's earlier agitation. That's why they tried to kill you. Not just to cover up contamination, but to protect a federal human experimentation program. Exactly. And it's why everyone involved was so desperate to shut me down. Sheriff Morrison, Dr. Hendricks, Dean Palmer, they're not just corrupt officials protecting corporate interests. They're complicit in crimes against humanity. I found my voice finally. Timmy, how did you find all this? How did you even know to look for it? My brother was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were full of pain I'd never seen before. Because I was one of the test subjects, Em. We both were. The world seemed to tilt sideways. What? Remember when we were kids, those medical checkups we had to get every year? The ones that were different from what other kids got at their pediatrician visits. I did remember. Annual appointments at a clinic we'd never been to before or since, with doctors who asked strange questions and ran tests that seemed excessive for routine checkups. Mom always said it was because of Dad's military service. Special health monitoring for military families. That was a lie. Timmy's voice was barely above a whisper. We were enrolled in a preliminary study when we were children. Our parents knew. They signed consent forms. They were paid for our participation. The betrayal hit me like a sledgehammer. Our parents sold us to be test subjects. Not sold, recruited. Dad was having financial problems after he left the military. The research program offered substantial compensation for families willing to participate in what they called longitudinal health and development studies. Jake had stopped pacing and was staring at both of us. What kind of studies? Cognitive development, behavioral modification, stress response, social adaptation. They gave us vaccines that weren't vaccines, supplements that were actually experimental drugs, exposed us to controlled environmental stressors. I felt like I was going to vomit. The childhood asthma I had that mysteriously disappeared when I turned 16. Induced and then treated as part of the study. The learning disabilities I struggled with in elementary school that suddenly got better in middle school, same thing. How long did this go on? Until we turned 18 and aged out of the pediatric study parameters. But they kept monitoring us through college, through our early careers. That's how they knew I was getting close to discovering the PIM contamination, because they'd been watching me my entire adult life. The implications were staggering. Every major event in our lives, every health issue, every struggle and success, how much of it had been natural, and how much had been the result of deliberate manipulation. Timmy, I said slowly, if you've known about this, why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I only figured it out 3 months ago, when I found my own medical records in a PIM database. All these years, I thought I was investigating environmental contamination. I didn't realize I was investigating my own childhood. Jake sat back down, his expression grim. This changes everything. We're not just talking about corporate corruption or even government cover-up. We're talking about systematic human experimentation spanning decades, involving multiple agencies and affecting thousands of people, which is why they were so desperate to stop me. Timmy looked at me with eyes full of regret. Em, I'm sorry. I dragged you into this. But once I realized the scope of what I'd found, I couldn't do it alone anymore. And you're the only person in the world I trust completely. What about Jake? I trust Jake to keep us alive and help us expose the truth. But you're my sister. You're the only person who shares this experience with me, who can understand what it means to discover that your entire childhood was a lie. I reached across the space between us and took my brother's hand. It was shaking. So what do we do now? I asked. We finish what I started. We get all the evidence to Senator Martinez and make sure it reaches the right people in Congress, the Department of Justice, and the media. We expose everyone involved, from the researchers who designed the studies to the government officials who authorized them. And then, Timmy squeezed my hand. Then we try to rebuild our lives knowing the truth about who we really are and what was done to us. Double quotes. Jake cleared his throat. There's something else we need to consider. If this human experimentation program has been running for 15 years or more, and if it involves multiple government agencies, then there are probably other test sites, other communities, other families who've been affected. You're right, Timmy nodded. The PIM study was just one of several similar projects. I found references to sites in Nevada, New Mexico, even Alaska. Hundreds of communities, thousands of families. Then this isn't just about justice for us. I said, it's about justice for everyone who's been victimized by this program. My phone suddenly buzzed, which should have been impossible given our location. I looked at the screen and saw a message from an unknown number. We know where you are. You have 1 hour to surrender all evidence and research materials. If you refuse, the consequences will be permanent. Jake was on his feet immediately. Weapon drawn. That's impossible. No cell service out here. Timmy was already moving toward the window, peering through gaps in the boards. Satellite phone. Military-grade communication equipment. They found us. Through the gaps, I could see dust clouds on the horizon. Vehicles approaching fast across the desert floor. How many? Jake asked. At least 3, maybe more. Timmy grabbed his backpack and tablet. We need to move now. As we prepared to run, I realized that everything we'd discovered, everything we'd learned about the conspiracy and human experimentation, meant nothing if we didn't survive the next hour. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't just fighting for my brother's life or for justice for the victims of contamination. I was fighting for the truth about my own childhood, my own identity, my own right to exist as something more than a government test subject. And I was ready to fight harder than I'd ever fought for anything in my life. The abandoned mining tunnels, stretched into darkness beneath our feet like the mouth of some ancient beast. Jake had found the entrance hidden behind a collapsed equipment shed, its opening barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. The sound of helicopters grew louder overhead as we descended into the earth. How far do these tunnels go? I whispered, following the narrow beam of Jake's flashlight through passages carved from solid rock decades ago. No idea. But miners always dug multiple exits in case of cave-ins or flooding. If we're lucky, there's another way out on the far side of this mountain. Timmy brought up the rear, constantly checking behind us for signs of pursuit. He'd rigged a small explosive device at the tunnel entrance. Nothing lethal, just enough to collapse the opening and buy us time if our pursuers found the entrance. They'll have thermal imaging, he said quietly. Body heat signatures show up clearly underground, especially in these desert conditions where the surrounding rock stays relatively cool. How long before they track us? Depends on how sophisticated their equipment is. Military-grade thermal detection can penetrate maybe 50 feet of rock. If we can get deeper than that, we might have a chance. The tunnel began to slope downward, more steeply, and the air grew cooler with each step. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness ahead, a steady rhythm that echoed off the stone walls. My phone had died completely now, not just no signal, but battery drained by the constant searching for non-existent cell towers. Jake, I said, what happens if we get out of here? Even if we escape, they know who we are. They know where we live, where we work, where our family is. How do we ever have normal lives again? Jake paused at a junction where the tunnel split in 3 directions. He played his flashlight down each passage, looking for air currents or other signs that might indicate which way led to an exit. Emma, after what you've learned about your childhood, about experimentation, do you really want to go back to a normal life? Or do you want to help expose the people who stole your childhood from you? That's assuming we survive long enough to expose anyone. We will. It was Timmy who answered, his voice carrying a conviction I hadn't heard since we were children. I've been running and hiding for months, terrified that every shadow might be someone coming to kill me. But now that you're here, now that we're together again, I remember who I used to be before fear took over my life. Who you used to be. Your annoying little brother who never gave up on anything, even when everyone told him he was crazy for trying. Despite everything, the danger, the pursuit, the revelations that had shattered my understanding of reality, I found myself smiling in the darkness. You were pretty annoying, I admitted. Still am. And I'm going to be annoying enough to bring down this entire conspiracy, no matter how powerful the people behind it think they are. Jake chose the middle tunnel, and we continued deeper into the mountain. The passage widened into what had once been a working mine shaft, with rusted rail tracks still embedded in the floor and rotting wooden support beams overhead. Ancient mining equipment sat abandoned in alcoves carved from the rock, pickaxes, or carts, coils of cable that crumbled at our touch. This place has been abandoned for decades, Jake observed. Which means if there is another exit, it might be blocked or collapsed. Or it might be our salvation. Timmy had stopped at what looked like a mining office built into a natural cave formation. The wooden door hung crooked on rusted hinges, but inside we could see the remains of desks, filing cabinets, and maps covering the walls. Maps, I said. Maybe they show other exits. We squeezed into the cramped office space. The maps were faded and brittle with age, but still legible. They showed a complex network of tunnels, shafts, and chambers spread throughout the mountain. Most importantly, they showed at least 3 different exits, the one we'd entered through, and 2 others on opposite sides of the mountain. There. Jake pointed to a tunnel marked Emergency Exit, North Face. If we can reach this point, we'll be miles from where they're looking for us. That's assuming the exit isn't blocked, Timmy said. And assuming we can find our way through all these passages without getting lost. We don't have a choice. They'll find that entrance eventually, and when they do, they'll come down here. With enough firepower to end this permanently. As if summoned by his words, a distant explosion echoed through the tunnels behind us. Dust rained from the ceiling, and the sound of collapsing rock told us our entrance had been discovered. They're in, Timmy said. How long before they reach us? Depends on how many men they sent down and how well they know these tunnels. Jake folded the map and stuffed it into his jacket. But we need to assume they'll be moving fast. We left the mining office and continued deeper into the mountain, following the route marked on the map toward the north face exit. The tunnels grew narrower and more treacherous, with loose rock underfoot and water seeping through cracks in the walls. At one point, we had to crawl through a passage so tight that my shoulders scraped against both sides. Timmy said during a brief rest in a wider chamber. There's something else I need to tell you about the experimentation program. What now? The cognitive and behavioral modifications they did to us as children. They weren't just studying. The effects, they were trying to create specific outcomes. Jake looked up from where he was studying the map. What kind of outcomes? Enhanced intelligence, improved memory retention, increased stress tolerance, heightened analytical thinking. They were trying to breed a generation of superior test subjects for future experiments. The implications hit me like cold water. You mean they were trying to make us smarter? Not just smarter. More compliant, more trusting of authority, more willing to accept official explanations even when they contradicted our own observations. The perfect citizens for a surveillance state. But it didn't work on you, I pointed out. You questioned everything. You investigated the contamination when officials told you to drop it. You refused to accept their explanations. Timmy smiled. Grimly, maybe I was defective. Or maybe the modifications wore off as I got older. Or maybe seeing what they'd done to those communities triggered something in me that overrode their programming. What about me? Did their modifications work on me? I don't know, Em, but you're here now, aren't you? You could have accepted the official story about my death, grieved, and moved on with your life. Instead, you came looking for the truth. Voices echoed from somewhere behind us in the tunnels, indistinct, but definitely human. Our pursuers had made it deeper into the mine than we'd hoped. Move, Jake said, and we resumed our journey through the darkness. The path to the north face exit took us through some of the most dangerous sections of the old mine. In one chamber, we had to edge around a shaft that dropped into blackness so deep our flashlight beams couldn't find the bottom. In another, we crawled through a passage where the ceiling had partially collapsed, leaving barely enough room to squeeze through. Why would miners dig tunnels this dangerous? I asked during another brief rest. They weren't dangerous when they were actively maintained, Jake explained. But 40 years of abandonment, weather, and seismic activity have made them unstable. Every step we take could trigger a collapse. Comforting. The good news is that anyone following us faces the same risks. Military training doesn't prepare you for navigating unstable underground passages in the dark. We reached another junction, this one with 4 possible routes. The map showed we needed to take the second tunnel from the left, but that passage was partially flooded with water that reflected our flashlight beams like black glass. How deep? Timmy asked, testing the water with his foot. Only one way to find out. Jake waded in first, the water rising to his knees, then his waist. It's manageable. Cold as hell, but manageable. The flooded section stretched for nearly 100 yards, with the water sometimes dropping to ankle deep and sometimes rising to chest high. We moved in single file, Jake leading, me in the middle, Timmy watching our backs. The sound of our movement through the water seemed impossibly loud in the confined space. Halfway through the flooded section, we heard voices again, much closer now. Our pursuers had reached the junction behind us. Thermal imaging won't work through standing water, Jake whispered. But if they have acoustic equipment, they can track us by sound. We moved more carefully, trying to minimize splashing while still making progress toward the exit. But the voices behind us were getting closer, and I could make out individual words now. ... heat signatures in tunnel 3, ... double quotes, least 3 subjects. ... orders are to take them alive if possible, ... If possible, I whispered to Jake. Means they prefer us breathing, but they're authorized to use lethal force if necessary. We reached the end of the flooded section and climbed onto dry rock. According to the map, we were less than a quarter mile from the north face exit. But that quarter mile included a vertical climb up what the miners had called the chimney, a natural shaft that connected the lower tunnels to passages. Closer to the surface, the chimney was exactly what it sounded like, a vertical tube of rock about 8 feet in diameter, stretching up into darkness. Iron rungs had been driven into the rock face decades ago, creating a ladder that disappeared above our flashlight beams. How far up? I asked, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. Jake consulted the map, maybe 100 feet. But some of these rungs might be loose or rusted through. Test each one before putting your full weight on it. Timmy went first, his movements careful and deliberate as he tested each rung. I followed, trying not to look down as the bottom of the shaft disappeared. Below us, Jake brought up the rear, pausing every few rungs to listen for sounds of pursuit. 30 feet up. Disaster struck. One of the iron rungs under Timmy's foot snapped with a sharp crack, and he dropped several feet before catching himself on the next solid rung. The broken piece of metal clanged against the walls as it fell, the sound echoing up and down the shaft like a bell. Everyone okay? Jake whispered. Yeah, Timmy replied, breathing hard, but they definitely heard that. We resumed climbing, moving faster now despite the increased risk. Behind us, voices at the bottom of the shaft confirmed our fears. Our pursuers had reached the chimney. Definitely went up here. Double quotes. Get the climbing gear. Call topside. Have them seal the north exit. Double quote. My heart sank. They were coordinating with surface teams to cut off our escape route. Even if we reached the exit, we might find armed men waiting for us. But we had no choice except to keep climbing. 50 feet, 60, 70. My arms burned from the strain, and my hands were raw from gripping the rough iron rungs. Below us, the sound of our pursuers beginning their own ascent echoed up the shaft. There, Timmy called softly from above. I can see the top. The chimney opened into a natural cave chamber, with passages leading in multiple directions. Fresh air flowed through the space, carrying the scent of sage and desert heat. We were close to the surface. Jake consulted the map one final time. Exit should be through that passage, maybe 50 yards. We jogged through the final stretch of tunnel, no longer worried about stealth. Speed was our only advantage now. The passage curved sharply to the right, then opened onto a ledge overlooking the desert valley below. The north face exit was exactly where the map indicated, a natural opening in the rock face, partially concealed by desert vegetation. But as we approached, the sound of helicopter rotors grew louder. Through the opening, I could see an aircraft circling the area, its spotlight sweeping the mountainside. They found it, Jake said. Probably thermal imaging from the air. So, what do? We can't go back, and we can't go forward. Timmy was studying the rock face around the exit. Maybe we can. He pointed to a series of narrow ledges that zigzagged down the mountain face. Rock climbing route. Probably used by local climbers who explore these caves. That's suicide, I said. It's nearly vertical, and we don't have equipment. It's survival, Timmy corrected. Those ledges connect to a wash at the bottom of the valley. If we can reach it, we can follow it east to where I hid a vehicle. You have a vehicle hidden out here? Insurance policy. 4-wheel drive pickup. With camping gear, water, and supplies. Enough to get us back to civilization. The helicopter was getting closer, its spotlight now probing the cave entrance. Behind us, voices in the tunnel indicated our pursuers had reached the top of the chimney. We're out of time, Jake said. Either we try the ledges, or we surrender. I looked at my brother, this person who had been brave enough to uncover a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government, who had been willing to fake his own death rather than let criminals silence him, who had trusted me enough to bring me into danger because he needed my help to see justice done. Lead the way, I said. Timmy went first, testing each foothold before committing his weight to it. The ledges were narrow, sometimes only a few inches wide, and the rock was crumbly in places. One mistake would send us plummeting 200 feet to the desert floor below. But as we made our way down the mountain face, moving from ledge to ledge in the darkness, while helicopters circled overhead and armed men searched the caves above, I realized something important. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of falling. Not of being caught. Not of what the future might hold. For the first time in my adult life, I knew exactly who I was and what I was fighting for. I was Emma Morrison, victim of government experimentation, sister to a man brave enough to risk everything for the truth, and someone who was going to make sure the people responsible for decades of human rights violations paid for their crimes. The desert floor was still a long way below us, and our enemies were still close behind. But as we climbed down through the darkness toward whatever waited at the bottom, I felt something I hadn't experienced since childhood. The absolute certainty that my little brother and I could overcome anything, as long as we faced it together, and we were going to face it together, no matter what it cost us. The pickup truck Timmy had hidden in the desert wash was a battered Ford F-150 that looked like it belonged to any ranch hand in Arizona. But when he started the engine, I could hear the subtle rumble of modifications underneath the hood. More horsepower than the factory had installed, and probably armor plating hidden beneath the dusty exterior. Where did you learn to prepare? Escape vehicles? I asked as we drove through the desert in the pre-dawn darkness. No headlights, navigating by starlight, and Jake's GPS unit. YouTube mostly. Amazing what you can learn when your life depends on it. Timmy grinned, but his hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Also had help from some preppers I met in online forums. People who've been expecting government overreach for decades. Jake sat in the passenger seat, constantly scanning the horizon for aircraft or vehicle lights. How far to your contact point? 40 miles northeast. Abandoned truck stop on the old highway. Senator Martinez's people are supposed to meet us there at sunrise. Supposed to? Nothing about this is guaranteed. For all we know, the senator's communications are compromised, or her staff has been infiltrated, or she's decided the political risk is too high. I leaned forward from the back seat. What happens if her people don't show? Then we go to Plan B, Timmy said. Which is? I'm working on it. The desert landscape rolled past us in shades of gray and black, punctuated by the occasional cactus. Silhouette or rocky outcropping. We drove in relative silence for 20 minutes before Jake's satellite phone buzzed with an encrypted message. It's from Carlos, he said, reading the screen. The storage facility raid made national news. They're calling it a terrorist incident involving stolen classified documents. My stomach dropped. They're making us look like criminals. Worse. They're making us look like national security threats. Carlos says there are FBI alerts out for Emma Morrison and Nathan Sullivan. That's me, wanted in connection with theft of classified materials and possible domestic terrorism activities. What? About Timmy? Still officially dead. Which might be our only advantage right now. Timmy laughed bitterly. Advantages, right. We're 3 fugitives in a stolen truck, driving through the desert to meet a senator who might not show up, carrying evidence of government crimes that could get us killed if we're caught with it. When you put it like that, it sounds almost hopeless, I said. Almost. Jake checked the GPS. But Senator Martinez didn't get to chair the Senate Environment Committee by backing down from fights. If she's agreed to meet us, she's already decided the political risk is worth taking. The abandoned truck stop appeared on the horizon as the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. It was exactly what you'd expect. Rusted gas pumps, boarded up windows, a parking lot full of weeds and broken glass. The kind of place that had thrived when the old highway was the main route between Phoenix and Flagstaff, then died when the interstate moved traffic 20 miles east. Timmy parked behind the building, where the truck wouldn't be visible from. The road. We sat there for 10 minutes, watching and listening for any signs of activity. Nothing moved except a hawk circling high overhead. They're late, I said. Or early and watching us from a distance to make sure we weren't followed. Jake checked his watch. Give them another 15 minutes. At exactly 6:47 a.m., a black SUV with tinted windows turned off the highway and drove slowly into the truck. Stop parking lot. It parked near the old restaurant entrance, engine running, no one getting out. That's either Senator Martinez's people, or we're about to be arrested, Timmy said. Or killed, I added helpfully. You two are just rays of sunshine. Jake opened his door. Stay here until I confirm who they are. He walked across the parking lot with his hands visible, but his posture ready for trouble. When he reached the SUV, the driver's window rolled down partway. Jake spoke to whoever was inside for several minutes, then turned and waved us over. The woman who emerged from the SUV was not what I expected. Senator Elena Martinez was smaller than she appeared on television, maybe 5'4" in her sensible shoes, with steel gray hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and clothes that looked more suited to a hiking trip than a clandestine meeting with fugitives. but her eyes were sharp as razors. And when she looked at me, I felt like she was cataloging every detail of my appearance for future reference. "Ms. Morrison," she said, extending her hand, "I'm sorry for your loss. And I'm sorry to learn that your loss was manufactured by people. Who should have been protecting you? Senator Martinez. Thank you for coming. Thank your brother. The preliminary information he sent me 3 months ago started an investigation that uncovered corruption in 4 different federal agencies." She turned to Timmy. "Mr. Morrison, you've caused quite a stir by refusing to stay dead. Seemed like the right thing to do, given the circumstances." "Indeed." The senator gestured toward her SUV. "Shall we conduct this meeting somewhere less exposed? My vehicle is equipped with signal jamming technology that will prevent electronic surveillance." Inside the SUV, Senator Martinez's aide introduced himself as David Chun, Deputy Counsel for the Senate Environment Committee. He looked like he'd been up all night reviewing documents, with bloodshot eyes and coffee stains on his shirt. "Before we begin," Senator Martinez said, "I need you to understand the political realities we're facing. The evidence Mr. Morrison provided initially was sufficient to open preliminary investigations. But what you're describing now, systematic, human experimentation involving multiple agencies and spanning decades, that's the kind of allegation that could destabilize the government." "Shouldn't it?" I asked. "If the government has been experimenting on its own citizens, doesn't that deserve to be destabilized?" "Morally, yes. Politically, it's more complicated." The senator opened a briefcase and pulled out several files. "We've confirmed the existence of the National Defense Research Institute, the contracts with PIM, and the involvement of several officials you've identified. But proving systematic human experimentation requires more than documents and recordings." "What does it require?" Timmy asked. "Living witnesses. Medical records that can be independently verified. Physical evidence that can't be dismissed as fabricated." She looked directly at both of us. "It requires you to submit to comprehensive medical examinations that will document the effects of whatever was done to you as children." The implications hit me immediately. "You want to turn us into evidence. I want to turn you into proof that can't be refuted in court or congressional hearings. Right now, everything you've provided could theoretically be dismissed as elaborate fiction created by anti-government extremists." Jake leaned forward. "What about the audio recordings of government officials discussing murder?" "Inadmissible. In court without proper chain of custody documentation. Possibly fabricated using voice synthesis technology. Any competent defense attorney could create reasonable doubt." David Chun opened one of the files. "But medical evidence of systematic childhood experimentation? That's physical proof that can be verified by independent experts. It transforms this from he said, she said allegations into documented crimes against humanity. And what happens to us during these examinations?" I asked. "You'll be placed in protective custody while medical experts document the effects of whatever modifications were made to your physiology and brain chemistry. Full body scans, neurological testing, blood work, genetic analysis. For how long? Weeks. Possibly months. However long it takes to build an unshakable case." Timmy was quiet, staring out the window at the desert landscape. Finally he said, "Senator, what guarantee do we have that this protective custody won't become permanent custody? Or that the people doing these examinations won't be connected to the same agencies that experimented on us in the first place?" "None whatsoever," Senator Martinez replied bluntly. "This is about calculated risk, Mr. Morrison. You can continue running and hiding while the people responsible for these crimes remain in power. Or you can take the risk of trusting the system to work the way it's supposed to work. The system that experimented on us as children. The system that also produced congressional oversight committees, independent judiciary, and investigative journalism capable of exposing the truth when presented with sufficient evidence. My phone, which I'd turned back on when we reached the truck stop, suddenly buzzed with multiple missed messages. Most were from friends and co-workers, but 3 were from an unknown number. "Emma, this is your mother. Please call me immediately. The FBI came to my house. Emma, I know about the storage unit. I know about the evidence. We need to talk. Emma, if you don't contact me within 24 hours, I'm going to assume you've been kidnapped or killed by the same people who faked your brother's death." I showed the messages to Timmy and Jake. Both men's expressions darkened. "She knows," Timmy said. "Somehow, Mom knows I'm alive." Senator Martinez read the messages over my shoulder. "This changes things significantly. If your mother has been contacted by federal agents, if she knows about the evidence, then our timeline just accelerated dramatically." "What do you mean?" "I mean we have hours, not days, before this entire situation becomes public. And if it becomes public before we're ready, before we have all the evidence properly documented and protected, then everyone involved will disappear behind national security classifications and executive privilege." David Chun was already making phone calls. "I can have medical teams standing by at Walter Reed within 6 hours. Full security detail, media blackout, congressional protection orders. But no guarantees we'll ever leave," I said. "No guarantees about anything," Senator Martinez confirmed. "But consider the alternative. Right now you're fugitives wanted by federal law enforcement for theft of classified materials. Those charges will stick unless we can prove the materials were evidence of government crimes, and proving that requires the medical examinations." Jake's satellite phone rang. He answered it and listened for several minutes before hanging up. "Carlos says there are federal agents at your ranch in Montana, Emma's apartment in Phoenix, and your mother's house. They're not just looking for us, they're questioning everyone we've ever had contact with. Which means we're running out of places to hide," Timmy said. "And running out of time to make a decision," Senator Martinez added. "Every hour we delay gives the people involved in this conspiracy more time to destroy evidence, relocate assets, and disappear into the bureaucracy, where they can't be reached." I looked at my brother, this person who had already sacrificed everything to expose the truth about what had been done to us and countless others. He'd faked his death, lived in hiding for months, risked his life multiple times to gather evidence. That could bring down some of the most powerful people in government. "Timmy, what do you want to do?" He was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he looked up, his eyes held the same determination I'd seen when we were children, and he decided to take on some impossible challenge. "I want to finish what I started. But this time the risk isn't just to me. If we do this, if we submit to these examinations and investigations, we're putting our lives in the hands of people we don't know and trusting a system that's already failed us once. But if we don't do this, the people responsible go free. The experimentation continues. Other families go through what we went through." "Exactly." He reached across the space between us and took my hand. "So I'm asking you, as my sister, as someone who's already risked everything to help me, are you willing to risk everything one more time?" I thought about the children in those contaminated communities, the families destroyed by diseases that could have been prevented, the researchers celebrating successful data collection while people died. I thought about our own childhood, stolen and manipulated by people who saw us as test subjects rather than human beings. And I thought about my mother's messages, about federal agents at her door, about the realization that this conspiracy reached so deep into the government that exposing it might require destroying the entire system to save it. "Yes," I said. "But I have one condition." "What?" "We call Mom first. If we're going to disappear into protective custody for months, if there's a chance we might not survive this, she deserved to know the truth about what happened to us." Senator Martinez nodded slowly. "That can be arranged. But understand that once she knows, Once anyone outside this vehicle knows you're alive and cooperating with a congressional investigation, there's no going back. Everyone involved in the conspiracy will know they're exposed, and they'll take desperate measures to protect themselves. What kind of desperate measures? The kind that got a reporter killed in a car accident. The kind that nearly got your brother killed in a staged hiking accident. The kind that could get all of us killed if we're not very, very careful. Jake checked his watch. Senator, if we're going to do this, we need to move now. Every minute we sit here increases the risk of being discovered. David, make the calls. Full protective detail, medical teams, secure communications with Mrs. Morrison. Senator Martinez looked at both of us. Are you absolutely certain about this decision? Because once we start down this path, there's no turning back. I squeezed Timmy's hand. We're certain. Then let's go save democracy, she said, starting the engine. Or die trying. As we drove away from the abandoned truck stop toward whatever waited for us in Washington, I realized that my brother and I were about to become something we'd never chosen to be. Symbols in a battle between truth and power that would determine whether the American government could experiment on its own citizens and get away with it. The morning sun was rising over the desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. It looked like the dawn of either a new day of justice or the beginning of the end of everything we'd fought to expose. Either way, we were going to face it together. 6 months later, I stood at the podium in the Hart Senate office building, looking out at a packed hearing room filled with cameras, reporters, and the families of experimentation victims from across the country. The medical examinations had been everything Senator Martinez promised and worse. Weeks of tests that documented decades of systematic modifications to our bodies and minds. But the evidence was irrefutable. Brain scans showing artificial neural pathway alterations. Blood work revealing synthetic compounds that had been administered throughout our childhood. Genetic markers that proved exposure to experimental gene therapy. Physical proof that Timmy and I, along with hundreds of other children, had been turned into living laboratories for government research. Chairman Wilson, members of the committee, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. My name is Emma Morrison, and I'm here to tell you about Project Echo, Twin, a government program that stole the childhoods of American citizens for the advancement of human experimentation research. In the witness gallery, I could see my mother sitting in the front row, tears streaming down her face. The past 6 months had been hardest on her. Learning that her children were alive but had been living as government test subjects. Discovering that the annual medical checkups she'd thought were routine had actually been experimental procedures. Realizing that the money she and my father had received wasn't compensation for military service, but payment for allowing their children to be used as research subjects. She'd testified the day before, breaking down completely as she described the recruitment process, the signed consent forms, the promises that the research would help other children while providing enhanced cognitive abilities for her own. Her testimony had been devastating, a mother's guilt and horror at realizing she'd been complicit in her children's victimization. The evidence you'll see today, I continued, documents a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of multiple government agencies. A conspiracy that viewed American citizens as expendable research subjects and our communities as testing grounds for industrial and biological warfare. Timmy sat at the witness table beside me, no longer the haunted fugitive who'd lived in hiding for months. The medical examinations had actually helped him, allowing doctors to reverse some of the neurological damage caused by the childhood experiments. He was sharper now, more focused, his memory clearer than it had been in years. The contamination at Phoenix Industrial Manufacturing wasn't an accident, he said, leaning toward his microphone. It was a deliberate exposure event designed to study the long-term effects of chemical weapons on civilian populations. The cancer clusters, the birth defects, the neurological disorders, They were expected outcomes that researchers documented for future military applications. Senator Martinez, now chairing the Joint Committee investigation, nodded gravely. Mr. Morrison, in your estimation, how many people were affected by these experimental programs? Based on the documents we recovered, at least 12,000. Individuals across 37 different sites. Children, elderly residents of nursing homes, prison populations, military personnel, and entire communities near industrial facilities. The hearing room erupted in shocked murmurs. 12,000. Victims, 37 experimental sites. The scope was staggering even to people who'd been following the investigation for months. And the government officials involved? Senator Martinez asked. 43 individuals are currently under federal indictment, including former sheriff Bradley Morrison, former medical examiner Patricia Hendricks, and former university dean Sarah Palmer. Additionally, 17 current or former federal employees, 8 defense contractors, and 6 pharmaceutical company executives. Jake sat in the gallery behind the witness table, no longer my protector but my partner in every sense of the word. The months of protective custody had brought us together in ways I never expected. Facing death had a way of clarifying what mattered, and what mattered was the quiet rancher who'd risked everything to help 2 strangers seek justice. We'd been married 3 weeks ago in a small ceremony at the Walter Reed Medical Facility, with Senator Martinez as our witness and a federal security detail as our wedding party. Not exactly the wedding I'd imagined as a girl, but perfect for the life we'd chosen together. Ms. Morrison, Senator Martinez continued, what do you want? The American people to understand about what happened to you and your brother. I thought about that question, the same one reporters had been asking for months as the story exploded across international headlines. Congressional investigations, Department of Justice prosecutions, United Nations human rights inquiries. The story had grown far beyond 2 siblings seeking justice for their brother's faked death. I want them to understand that this could happen to anyone, I said. We weren't selected because we were special or different. We were selected because we were convenient. Because our parents needed money and trusted authority figures who told them they were helping their children while serving their country. And what about the future? How do we prevent something like this from happening again? Timmy leaned forward. Complete transparency in government research programs. Independent oversight of all human subjects research. Criminal penalties for anyone who participates in unauthorized experimentation. And most importantly, a cultural change that values human dignity over scientific advancement. The hearing continued for 6 more hours with testimony from other victims, expert witnesses, and government officials attempting to explain how such a massive conspiracy had operated for decades without detection. The answers were always the same: compartmentalized information, need-to-know protocols, and the assumption that someone else was providing proper oversight. During a break, Jake joined me in the witness preparation room where Timmy was reviewing notes for his afternoon testimony. How are you holding up? Jake asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. Tired, angry, hopeful. I leaned back against his chest. It's surreal, sitting in that room, watching senators apologize for something that never should have happened in the first place. But it's working, Timmy said, looking up from his papers. 6 months ago, we were fugitives hiding in the desert. Now we're changing federal law. The Morrison Act is going to pass. Mandatory reporting of all government research involving human subjects, independent oversight boards, victim compensation funds. Named after us, I said, still not quite believing it. Named after everyone who suffered because of these programs. We're just the faces people remember. That evening, after the hearing concluded, we drove to Arlington National Cemetery. It was something we'd talked about doing for months, visiting the grave that bore Timmy's name, the memorial to a death that never happened. The headstone was simple granite with his name, dates of birth and supposed death, and the inscription, "Beloved son and brother." Fresh flowers lay at the base. Our mother still visited weekly, even knowing he was alive. Her way of grieving the childhood that had been stolen from him, the innocence that had been destroyed by people who should have protected him. "It's weird seeing your own grave," Timmy said, kneeling to touch the headstone, "but also kind of freeing. Timothy Morrison, the victim, is buried here. The person who survived, who fought back, who exposed the truth, that's someone different." "Different how?" I asked. "Stronger, less trusting, but more hopeful. Does that make sense?" It did. The past 6 months had changed all of us in ways we were still discovering. The medical examinations had revealed that many of the cognitive enhancements from our childhood were still active: improved memory, accelerated pattern recognition, enhanced analytical thinking. Ironic that the very modifications designed to make us compliant test subjects had actually made us more effective at exposing the conspiracy. "What happens now?" Jake asked as we walked back to the car. "The hearings are over, the indictments are filed, the legislation is passed. Will you go back to normal lives?" I laughed. "What's normal for people like us? We're probably the most famous victims of government experimentation in American history. There's no going back to anonymous lives in Phoenix or quiet ranches in Montana. So what do you want to do?" Timmy answered first. "I want to help other victims. There are thousands of people out there who've been affected by these programs, people who don't know what was done to them, people who are afraid to come forward, people who need medical treatment for conditions caused by experimental procedures." "A foundation?" I suggested. "More than that, a network. Legal advocacy, medical support, psychological counseling, political lobbying. Everything we wish we'd had when we were trying to survive this." Jake nodded slowly. "The Morrison Foundation. For human experimentation victims. I like it. And you?" I asked him, "What do you want to do with the rest of your life?" He smiled, the same expression that had first made my heart skip during those terrifying days when he was the only person keeping us alive. "I want to spend it with you. Fighting the good fight, protecting people who can't protect themselves, making sure nothing like this ever happens again." 2 years later, the Morrison Foundation operated out of a converted office building in Washington, D.C., with satellite offices in 12 states. We'd helped identify over 3,000 additional victims of government experimentation programs, secured medical treatment for families affected by environmental testing, and lobbied successfully for stronger oversight of all federal research involving human subjects. The criminal trials were finally winding down. Sheriff Morrison had been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Dr. Hendricks received 12 years. Dean Palmer pled guilty to conspiracy charges and was serving 8 years, while cooperating with ongoing investigations into university-based research programs. The higher-level officials were proving harder to prosecute. Many had claimed they were unaware of the experimentation aspects of programs they'd authorized, insisting they thought they were funding legitimate medical research or environmental monitoring. Juries were reluctant to convict people who seemed genuinely shocked by the evidence of human rights violations, but the cultural impact was undeniable. Congressional oversight of government research had been completely restructured. Independent human subjects protection boards now had real authority to shut down unethical studies. Victim compensation funds had distributed over $2 billion to affected individuals and communities. Most importantly, the story had sparked a national conversation about government transparency, scientific ethics, and the rights of citizens versus the needs of national security research. I was testifying before yet another congressional committee, this one investigating similar programs in other countries, when my phone buzzed with a message from Jake. "Check the news, now." Discreetly opened a news app on my phone and saw the headline, "Blackwater Environmental Services CEO found dead in apparent suicide." David Blackwater, The man who'd orchestrated the cover-up of human experimentation programs across multiple states had been found in his office with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. His suicide note, released by federal investigators, was a full confession detailing decades of criminal activity and naming dozens of co-conspirators who hadn't yet been identified. During the lunch break, I called Timmy, who was in Phoenix meeting with a support group of local experimentation victims. "Did you see?" I asked. "Yeah. Part of me feels like justice was served. Part of me wishes he'd lived to face trial and answer for what he did to all those people." "Any regrets about exposing him?" "None whatsoever. I got a call this morning from a woman in New Mexico whose son died of cancer at age 6. She said our investigation helped her understand that his death wasn't random, wasn't just bad luck. That knowing the truth, even though it's horrible, helped her process her grief in a way that the lies never could." That afternoon, I finished my testimony and drove home to the house Jake and I had bought in suburban Virginia. It was nothing fancy, a modest colonial with a big backyard where we could host foundation events and barbecues for victim families. But it was ours, purchased with our own money, free from any government connection or corporate influence. Jake was in the Fayon's kitchen when I arrived, wearing an apron that read, "Kiss the Cook," a gag gift from Timmy that he wore unironically while preparing elaborate meals for our frequent house guests. "How was the hearing?" he asked, not looking up from whatever he was stirring on the stove. "Productive. The international investigation is expanding to include similar programs in 6 other countries. Apparently, human experimentation wasn't just an American problem. Unfortunately, not surprising." He turned to face me, and I saw the familiar concern in his eyes. "But how are you holding up?" I know these hearings bring back difficult memories. I considered the question seriously. 2 years ago, I would have said the memories were nothing but painful. The betrayal, the fear, the realization that my entire childhood had been a lie. But now, looking back, I could see how those experiences had shaped me into someone capable of fighting for justice, capable of surviving unimaginable challenges, capable of building something meaningful from the wreckage of trauma. "I'm good," I said, and meant it. Tired, but good. Ready for the next challenge, which is, Timmy wants to expand internationally. Help victims in other countries, support investigations into similar programs around the world. Jake smiled. "Of course he does. Your brother's never been satisfied with small victories. Neither have I, apparently." That evening, the 3 of us had dinner together at our house, something that had become a weekly tradition. Timmy lived in an apartment near the foundation offices but spent most evenings with us, planning new initiatives or just enjoying the simple pleasure of family time that had been stolen from us as children. "I got a letter today," he said over dessert, "from a girl in California whose parents were part of a psychological research program in the 1990s. She's 18 now, just starting college, and she wants to know if there are other people like her." "Other people like her?" I asked. "People who grew up knowing something was different about their family, about their childhood, but not understanding what. People who had medical procedures they couldn't remember, psychological evaluations. That didn't make sense. Parents who were secretive about their past." Jake leaned back in his chair. "How many more victims do you think are out there?" "Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. These programs operated for decades, across multiple countries, involving researchers from universities, government agencies, and private corporations." Timmy pulled out his tablet and showed us a map covered with red dots. "Each of these represents a confirmed or suspected experimentation site. We've investigated maybe 10% of them." I stared at the map, each dot representing communities like ours, families like ours, children who'd been turned into research subjects without their knowledge or consent. "It's overwhelming," I said. "It is. But 2 years ago we were hiding in a desert, convinced we were going to die before anyone learned the truth. Now we're part of an international movement to expose and prevent human experimentation. We've helped thousands of victims, changed federal law, and inspired investigations around the world. And we're just getting started, Jake added. Later that night, as Jake and I sat on our back porch watching stars appear in the darkening sky, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. From that devastating phone call telling me my brother was dead, through the terror of discovery and pursuit, to the triumph of justice and the ongoing work of healing. Do you ever wonder what our lives would have been like if none of this had happened? I asked. Jake considered the question. You mean if there had been no experimentation, no conspiracy, no need to fight for justice? Yeah, if we'd just been normal people living normal lives. Honestly, I think we would have found each other anyway. Maybe not under such dramatic circumstances, but I believe some connections transcend circumstances. That's very romantic for a former government agent. I'm a rancher now, remember? We're supposed to be romantic, I laughed, then grew serious again. Jake, are you happy? Really happy? Because this life we've built, it's not exactly what either of us planned. He took my hand, calloused fingers intertwining with mine. Emma, 3 years ago, I was a burned-out ex-agent raising cattle and trying to forget everything I'd seen. In government service. I thought my life was over, that I'd never find purpose or meaning again. And now? Now I wake up every morning next to someone I love, working to prevent other people from experiencing the trauma we survived. I get to be part of something bigger than myself, something that actually makes the world better. Even though it's dangerous, even though there are still people out there who'd rather see us dead than continuing this work. Especially because it's dangerous. Emma, comfortable lives don't change the world. Easy paths don't lead to justice. We're living exactly the lives we're supposed to be living. As if summoned by our conversation, Timmy appeared on the porch carrying 3 cups of coffee. Couldn't sleep either? He asked, settling into a chair beside us. Just thinking about the future, I said. Me too. I've been offered a position with the United Nations Human Rights Commission. They want me to head up an international task force investigating government experimentation programs. My heart sank. That means leaving Washington. Leaving the foundation. For a few years, yes. But Emma, this is bigger than our foundation, bigger than American victims. There are people suffering around the world because of programs similar to what we experienced. They need advocates who understand what they've been through. I knew he was right. The work we'd started had always been about more than our own healing or justice. It was about preventing future victims, holding governments accountable, and changing the culture that allowed human experimentation to flourish in secret. When would you leave? Jake asked. 6 months. Time to transition my responsibilities, train my replacement, make sure the foundation continues the work we've started. And you're sure about this? Timmy looked at both of us, his expression serious, but determined. 3 years ago, I was a college student working on an environmental thesis. I had no idea I was about to uncover crimes against humanity, or that I'd spend months as a fugitive hiding in the desert. But every choice I made along the way led me to this moment, to this opportunity to help people on a global scale. It sounds like you've already decided. I have. But I wanted to discuss it with you first, because none of this would have been possible without your support. Without both of you risking everything to help me survive and expose the truth. Jake raised his coffee cup to the Morrison siblings, still changing the world one impossible mission at a time. I raised my cup as well, to my family, blood and chosen, to justice that transcends borders, and to the belief that truth really can triumph over power, to the future, Timmy added. Whatever it brings. As we sat there on the porch, 3 people, whose lives had been irrevocably changed by government conspiracy and corporate greed, I realized that we'd done something remarkable. We'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to us and transformed it into a force for justice and healing. The little brother I thought I'd lost forever was alive and thriving, using his experience as a victim to prevent others from suffering the same fate. The rancher who'd saved our lives had become my partner in every sense, building a life dedicated to protection and service. And I discovered that grief and trauma, when channeled toward justice, could become the foundation for hope and change. The stars wheeled overhead, the same constellations that had guided us through the desert when we thought we might not survive. Another day. Now they seemed like promises that truth would always find a way to shine through darkness, that courage could overcome even the most powerful conspiracies, and that family, however it's defined, would always be worth fighting. For tomorrow would bring new challenges, new victims to help, new battles to fight. But tonight, sitting with the people I loved most in the world, I was exactly where I belonged. My little brother was alive. We'd exposed the truth. And we were going to spend the rest of our lives making sure nothing like this ever happened to anyone else's family. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined when I first received that impossible text message. It was better. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.